To introduce, I'm Professor Bernie Hogan. I'm one of the faculty here at the Oxford Internet Institute, and I've been the host for Stuart Bowden. And Stuart and his colleague are going to be talking to us today. It's a real treat for me to hear about this topic. The title, as stated, is how older audiences are erased, distorted, and misunderstood in social and search, and the ethics of using AI to address representation in the gaps in advertising. So two really meaty topics that are worth bringing together and thinking about, well, can we just use the AI to solve these problems that we had as pre-existing? I suspect, like Bettridge's law of headlines, the answer is no, we can't just use that. But the devil's in the details, and I'm really going to be keen to hear about that. Now, Stuart and Aleksandra are here today from Wavemaker, and one of the stats they give us here in this introduction is quite striking to give us a sense of what we're dealing with here. 92% of Gen Xers are on social platforms daily, and I'm assuming this would be people around 45 to 60 for Gen X, but I'm sure we'll hear more details. And yet, they're the subject of less than 5% of platform research. We really take them for granted. And meanwhile, Gen X were at one point the kids, and whatever they were doing was the cool thing. And I'm sure people were quite, interested in boomboxes or CD players at some point. Now, to give you a small introduction to them, Stuart Bowden is the Chief Strategy and Product Officer of Wavemaker. And, they're in media planning a media planning agency. They represent all sorts of major clients, including L'Oreal, TikTok, Adobe, and Netflix, as well as the UK government. And so Stuart's been here as a visiting policy fellow at the OII. And Aleksandra, now your last name I haven't practiced. This is Grabowska?
Yes, Grabowska.
Grabowska. Great. And so you're the product development leader and the AI engineering leader at the company. And before this, she was telling me about the considerable portfolio of teams underneath. So now some ground rules. The presentation is going to be about 30 to 40 minutes, and it's going to be followed by a discussion at the end. So if you're joining us online, you'll see here on Zoom that we have both the sort of ability here for chat and for Q&A. We'd really love it if you could place any questions that you have for the end at the Q&A there, and I'll do what I can to moderate and make sure that we can get everyone heard and get some feedback for our speakers. Now, it's also worth noting that the event is being recorded, and it will be posted on our website following this event. So you can have a recap or share it with your friends as you see fit. So it is great to have you here, both in person and virtually, and it's also great to have our speakers here. And so now it's your turn.
Thank you very much. Great. Right. Thank you, Benny. We've simplified the title slightly from the very long one that we posted because it was kind of confusing us. But as Benny said, we're going to be talking a little bit about about the combination of age gaps, what we see as kind of algorithmic problems, particularly from a marketing and business perspective, and the way that affects representation in advertising and what we might do about it, I suppose. This is us. We've just been introduced, so I won't pause on this. But just a very kind of important housekeeping part from us. We aren't academics, so our footnotes and our references may not be perfectly kind of cited. And it's possible that we structured some of our research in suboptimal ways, but people can tell us afterwards how we should have done it. So we aren't academics, and we aren't traditional creative ad businesses either. We're kind of less concerned, I guess, with the creative development of communications for brands. We're more interested in really trying to understand the media data and technology and cultural frameworks around the way that communications work on behalf of our clients in quite a strong commercial context. And that's kind of what's brought us here from our office in Sea Containers today. And this kind of line of thought for us started because we've got, started because we've got two main types of clients at Wavemaker that have a shared interest and a shared problem. We would kind of posit. We have clients that are focused on women, often affluent women, slightly older women, and want to find important ways to communicate with them. And so it's critical that we really understand their behaviors, their needs, their requirements, the way that these brands can interact with them, find them, and play some kind of role in their lives. And we have a whole load of clients who run platforms or who are data owners or who are audience creators or algorithm suppliers and coders. And for them, trying to understand how they maximize their revenue on their platforms by ensuring that their platforms are open and available to audiences that have money. It's obviously a kind of area of mutual interest that we kind of sit in the middle of. And there's a particular kind of data problem that we couldn't reconcile for both sets of these clients, really. 28% of people on TikTok on a daily basis are from the GenX age group, but almost no money follows them on the platform. People don't know or are not able for some reason to get money to these audiences, and for us as a media planning agency, that's a problem in the system, because it's our job to effectively find audiences and to make sure that we're positioning in the right way. And for all of those brands you've just seen, this is a, I'm not going to say an existential business question, but it's a problem. We know where the audiences are, but we can't effectively get the money to them, and that kind of distorts the market really for us. So we wanted to understand it a little bit better. So we've done a kind of bunch of stuff to try and understand this as fully as possible. Some of this was straight research. Basically done 121 depth one-to-one interviews in a number of markets with this audience group to understand their behaviors and their usages, their needs, their affordances going into these platforms. We have a proprietary data set ourselves that we've gone into quite deeply, which is looking at very granular media behaviors. We put 40,000 kind of fully compliant trackers onto the devices of people in this age group, so we could follow over the course of a month the kind of frame by frame social experience, and understand what they were stopping on, what they were doing, what was pulling them in, where they were going next, and try and track those journeys in a bit more detail. We've been back to the marketplace, influencer marketplaces, to try and understand the financial dynamics, the availability of these audiences, and how they interact with, at the creator level, the people who are viewing and engaging with their content, to try and see what we could derive from that insight. And we have our own kind of large scale journey research, which is querying individual points and way markers along individual purchase and experience journeys. So we kind of put all of that data together, but we've also, I say we, all this kind of team have helped us pull together kind of 3 more practical experiments that we'll talk about in a second as well. The first of those is really trying to understand the different behaviors of people on social platforms when people look more or less like them, and how people's understanding of where that image was derived from alters their engagement and their reported satisfaction and their actual behavior on the platforms based on that information. Secondarily, we did some quite deep analysis on search and social platforms about both images being served, but also about content being kind of algorithmically selected for multiple audiences, and try to understand the differences that are emerging in that. And we also track the effect of different profile and behaviors on the way that TikTok creates and interprets your profile and the content that it's going to serve. So there's quite a lot of different bits of research going into this, but we're going to talk about three kind of specific areas. The first is a query really about the accuracy and meaningfulness of the representation of GenX audiences on the platforms back to themselves, and how that compares with the real situation. The second is a series of understandings about GenX prior needs, learned previous behaviors, requirements and affordances as they engage with the platform. What is it we can interpret from their real online behaviors, which tells us something about the way that they interpret with the platform, which might be different from our prior expectations. Certainly personally, when I think about users on TikTok, for example, I automatically default to a series of kind of shortcuts of behaviors and needs predicated on watching my kids on TikTok in my personal instance. But obviously there are many other usage behaviors, many other sets of needs that exist on that platform. We try to fit it all into one area. And then we'll talk really about how we've tried to think about synthetic humans and generative AI filling some of these gaps and trying to direct some of the traffic in this space. We hate talking about generations because they're obviously nonsense and kind of, and really annoying me. But for the purpose of this, it's useful for us to use it as a consistent data way to pull and organize the data. So we're looking for GenX here, 61 to 79 kind of birth years. So just a couple of very quick slides of context. This isn't just an algorithmic problem. I mean, culture overall is pretty bad at representation of lots of different gender groups, ethnicity groups, but also particularly, and much less commented on, age groups. That there's a massive cultural content bias towards younger audiences, which gets readdressed slightly as you become older. So this is just kind of ad data. If you analyze the age of people who appear in ads, it's wildly out of proportion with people's national representative demographic average. And for us as an ad industry, we just don't spend any time really looking at this age group. So this is data from WARC, which is the World Advertising Research Council. It's the main place that research lives and is queried inside the industry. You can go all day long on research into millennials and Gen Z, but there's very little understanding about Gen X behaviours and needs and interactions with media, and very little money follows them proportionally inside the industry. So when we look at total Group M spend, Group M's the media buying arm by about 1 in 3 ads in the world. So we've got quite a good tracking set of data. We look at the audiences that we're trying to contact. 3/4 of our campaigns specify they want to reach millennials. Less than half of our campaigns want to talk to people over 50. So it's kind of pretty right the way through our business. There's a lack of understanding and a lack of kind of research. And I'd even suggest that part of the reason this was so hard is there's not a lot of academic research in this area. You can find, again, lots of research into younger audiences, the effect of social media, misrepresentation for younger audiences, and quite a lot on kind of older audiences. Once you get over 65 or 70, you'll find quite a lot of research again on older audiences and the barriers for their digital exposure, their access to the digital commons, their access to different ways of interacting with the digital world, but very little in this area because quite often we're close-ish to the age of some of these groups in kind of industry, even in academia, and so we kind of center it on ourselves and we assume that it's known, I would suggest. So the first thing we did was think about age in social search.
Yes, so what we've done is we took a look at already existing research around this subject, and we found a great study from 2019 done by AARP, which is the American Association for Retired People. And what they've done is they take a look at a big collection of photographs online and analyzed how people 50 plus are portrayed in those photographs versus younger audiences. And what was interesting to us is that they were rarely portrayed in work environment. Just 13% of those pictures presented people actually working, whereas in reality, 1/3 of Americans over 50 is still very active and is working. So we decided to take a look at that, and we designed a study. We wanted to see how 7 different occupations, so accountants, lawyers, teachers, doctors, police officers, nurses, and advertising workers are portrayed in visual search. We decided to take a look at 2 search engines, Google and Bing, and we wanted to look at results geographically. So we identified 4 regions, APAC, MENA, LATAM, and Europe, and 2 countries specifically, so UK and US. And then what we decided to do, we via an API grabbed the pictures presented in search. We deduplicated between those 2 search engines. And using AI, first of all, we established whether there's a face present in that picture. It's clear and visible. And then are we able to assess the age of it, again, using AI. We found one problem. We wanted initially to take a look at the results and grab the results via VPN, but we realized very quickly that we're getting more or less the same results for different occupations. So we wouldn't be able to differentiate between UK and US when we were looking for a nurse, for example. So what we've done, we added a bunch of search terms connected to geography. So we didn't just search for nurse UK, but nurse UK or nurse US, enfermera Mexico or pielęgniarka Polska, so that we can then be able to see the actual local pictures and news stories, stuff that really was of interest to us. So we collected 135,000 different photographs, and roughly 1/3 of them were able to identify faces in. And as for the results, well, across all the professions we took a look at, there is a gap in how the visual search is presenting them versus what happens in reality. But for 3 occupations in particular, the gap is is higher than in the other cases. So here you can take a look at the charts. There are 2 lines. The orange one shows the actual average lives of people doing certain professions across multiple different regions and countries. And the say bluish green, I should have picked an easier color, is showing the image that the age that we draw from the pictures we gathered online. And as you can see, in those kind of area, the lines are closer together, the gap is smaller. But actually for the nurses, police officers and teachers, their average age in reality is closer to 40, 41, 43 years old. And visual search is showing people on average around 30 years old. And I've decided to show you 2 particular examples. So if we take a look at police officers in Europe, here we have different age brackets. So we can see that there is a huge underrepresentation of police officers between 25 and 34. So in image search, we see a lot of faces like that, where in reality, there's just 26% of police officers in that age in Europe. But there's a huge underrepresentations of police officers over 45. So we can say that actually approximately 30% of police officers is kind of disappearing online from the visual search engines. And the situation is very similar with the teachers in US. Again, 1/3 of them over the age of 45 is kind of underrepresented. They're missing from visual search. And this trend is consistent across multiple occupation across all the regions, with one exception, and this exception is advertising workers, in which case the lines over actually 35 are pretty close together. So their advertising workers are very much reflected in visual search exactly as they are, the older ones. But there's huge underrepresentations for a very young audience. So for people under 25 who are very present in that industry, but not visible in the search results there. And looking at the AARP study, there's one thing that was very interesting to us as well. In those pictures that they've analyzed, people over 50 were very rarely presented with technology, with smartphones and computers. And when they're often presented with somebody who's helping them actually understand how to use the device, showing them how to use a smartphone or a computer screen, when we know that it's obviously very untrue. Stuart?
And this was kind of interesting for us because obviously all of these platforms are advertising funded. They're 90 to 95% funded by ad dollars, it kind of in most cases. And so there's pressure on the people who do the funding, pressure on advertisers, brands, and ad agencies to try and ensure that we're pushing platforms to do the right thing. And obviously many brands are very purpose orientated. So obviously everyone will be aware of the Dove work campaign for Real Beauty, lots of work, particularly looking at the effect of kind of social media pressure on younger women. So for us, this was the start of a conversation with clients like L'Oreal, for example, many makeup brands like Age Perfect, for example, or we look after Nivea for Beiersdorf, Nivea Q10, kind of anti-aging products. What's the right way for us to think about how we bring people more into a kind of campaigning position? So we're in development at the moment with Nivea, really exploring ways in which Nivea's customers here in Germany, in this instance, where it's an unbelievable power brand, how do we recruit customers to gather real correctly age tagged images of real women in this age group? And what is it we do with that visual data set when we have it. As I mentioned, we have Google as a client. We work quite a lot with their engineers around TensorFlow, trying to work out what's the right way for us to try and create a slightly different series of training data sets. We also work with Captify, trying to work out how do we bring in some of these other influencer points to try and change these results. We can bring customers into more of an activist relationship with this problem, rather than just making an ad about it. Right, we'll move on to talk about GenX behaviours. There's a slight change of gear. This data comes more from on-device work and the kind of qualitative and quantitative analysis that we were doing around behaviours online. And I talked earlier on about the assumptions that we have about usage behaviour. It's quite interesting when you get to the granular detail of GenX users kind of online. Obviously, they're present in very large numbers, but their session usage, right down to an individual kind of contact level, is quite different. They scroll more slowly. They're much more selective about what they engage with. They interact a lot less. They comment a lot less. They're logged in a lot less. And it's much more structured in how they deal with it. And they sense in their engagement that they're not seeing themselves in the ad materials or in what's being served to them from creators. And we'll talk a bit in a second about why we think that's so and what ways that we can think about it. But they are consciously aware of the fact that they're on a platform which they want to use, which is giving them benefits, but which they are not kind of correctly able to see themselves. And we see lots of behaviours that for us are perhaps anachronistic hangovers from previous learned media behaviours. So older audiences don't pick up their phone continually to go to social platforms. They have almost scheduled times. They have much longer periods at relatively consistent times of the day, which they do in an uninterrupted with screen way. It plays a different role in their social mix. They're often not double screening. They're treating it more like a magazine, more like a newspaper experience, and they're spending time with a narrower range of content, interacting with a lot less, a much more lean back experience they're trying to generate in the space. And when we look at the hashtags of the creator content that they're engaging with on the platforms, we started to see some interesting stuff start to come through. Obviously, for younger groups, the way we think about TikTok, the way we think about the platform is drop shop, hot, very, very current, very fast moving kind of trends on that area. When we think about GenX audience on the platform, what they choose to give their attention to, again, it's a much more interconnected social relationship that they're looking to extract from the time they're putting onto the platform, whether that platform is Instagram or TikTok or any other platform. They're looking to improve. They're looking to receive. They're looking to honor. They use a lot of interrelationship language about the people and the content they're choosing to spend their time. It's not an information exchange, it's a relationship exchange, even though the platform is not very well designed for that. And I think we heard quite a lot of friction, I think, of people not quite knowing how to manage what they wanted from this platform, bringing Facebook style behaviors at best, or kind of other media behaviors into the place where the content was. And when older creators on the platform are successful, we see that they're creating much longer posts. They're building semi-long form content. Often these things are shot more like a TV ad. They're outdoor, they're scripted, they're edited in a completely different way, and edited in a way that the algorithm doesn't particularly support or endorse. So it's quite hard for creators to be successful on the platform because of the way that their audiences want to consume and the way that they want to create for them. But when they do see themselves in this space, they're enormously responsive. They're very reactive to seeing themselves in these small moments of kind of representation. And so we wanted to have a look at what it is they're actually seeing and how is TikTok deciding what to give different audiences on the platform.
Right. So again, we decided to conduct a research on this. And we don't know much about how TikTok is serving content and what it's deciding what kind of content to give to different people, but we know that it's using a couple of criteria. So it's deciding on how popular the particular content is, how popular certain creators are, where is the device, where it's the geographical location, and also was there any prior interaction with different kind of content. So if I saw and liked, for example, the content about motorcycles, I was more likely to see more content about motorcycles coming my way. So to have an unbiased study, we set up 2 brand new accounts for a 21-year-old female and for a 55-year-old female. And we decided to take a look at 3 walls for a week, 3 times a day. We took a look at 150 posts, movies posted there. We downloaded them and analyzed it. And the third one was anonymous feeds. We wanted some sort of a way to differentiate and be able to compare the results to. And again, we used AI to basically do the same exercise as before. But this time, because we had movies there, first of all, each movie we chopped into 10 equally distributed frames. And then in those frames, we looked for faces using AI. And then when the faces were detected, we identified ages. So throughout the weekly exercise, we managed to gather 7,000 unique videos that gave us around 70 hours of content in which we identified almost 15,000 faces. And we have 2 key conclusions after this exercise. One is that both login users got half of the content exactly the same, almost half. The anonymous feed got slightly different content, and working hypothesis for us is that's because there was more content that should be liked or was supposed to be liked by men, and the content that our 2 profiles saw was targeted more at women. But the age wasn't that big of a differentiator there. And the second conclusion is that even in the cases where the content differs, still the ages, the people that they see in those movies were exactly the same age. So there are 3 lines in here for the average age of faces that we recognized in the movies that we analyzed. And there's no difference between all 3 profiles, meaning that all 3 accounts with more or less the same age of influencers. And we started thinking, is it because the algorithm worked this way, or is it because in TikTok there's not enough older creators? So we took a look at the top 7 influencers globally that have a combined reach of 741 million people. I don't know what the duplication is, but still the numbers are pretty big to me. And out of those, this bunch, that this one person that's over 30, and the rest is around 25 years old. And that's true for the generally for the content creators on TikTok. A huge amount of them is from Gen Z plus, so they're sometimes in their early teens. Millennials are second, but they're not really close second. They're responsible for 22% of the content there. And Gen Z creates just 1% of the content in the platform, meaning that even if TikTok wanted to serve them the more appropriate content, would be very, very difficult. And it's a serious challenge from the ad industry point of view, because when we are looking at the how affluent certain demographics are, we know that GenX are probably a place where we should give the right content to. And currently, there's not enough content so that we can actually fulfill their needs and give them something that they'd be more interested in.
And this is a real problem for us, and potentially a problem in the medium term for the platforms themselves. If Gen X at the moment have about 30% of the total wealth in the world, and in the next 5 years, 10 years, they're going to inherit pretty much all the wealth from the boomer generation back again. We're in a situation where from a commercial point of view, there's a real need to be able to communicate with this group, but there's not enough content that's relevant for them. And because there's no one curating and creating the content in the way that there would be in a normal commercial television platform or a normal publication world, we're getting quite a significant disconnect between how these things work. So Ola was mentioning earlier on that perhaps only 1% of the creators in that TikTok ecosystem, are older than 30, 38. I don't know, it's slightly scary. We currently spend about 5% of our clients' influencer budget, either directly with the influencer or in terms of promoting influencer content that they've created with our brands on older audiences. So we're trying to prime an industry that can support more older creators coming onto the platform, but which is what we want. It's what we want to happen. So we have more choices about what we do. but obviously, the platform's still 28% older. But because the algorithm, as we saw, just keeps pulling people back to the most popular younger culture, we can't overcome the latent bias in the currently available material, the quantity being made by younger audiences, and the algorithm feeding it to older audiences, whether they really want it or not. So we're in this weird situation where we have a media channel, we have an automatically curated media channel that is unable to correct for this absence of content easily, and that becomes harder as we lose contact with these audiences on more traditional media channels like broadcast TV. It becomes much harder for us to discover and communicate with them. It feels to us like a question about how we try and change the research and think about what potential solutions we might have. And talk about Gen AI, because when we think about this, it feels like perhaps generative content, synthetic humans, synthetic influencers are quite an interesting way that we could resolve this challenge inside the space, and find more partners, more creators, more spaces where we could go. And yeah, if you want to quickly talk to obviously the challenge with our data.
Yeah, so I'll just add a few words on this. So in the algorithm that then that picks age of pictures we used was trained on Wikipedia and IMDb database. And it is a problem to find big database of pictures that have ages attached to them. Therefore, it's a difficult challenge to actually train the algorithm properly to find the data that you can actually use. And this particular database was created in a way that researchers decided to take 100,000 very famous celebrities from IMDb and Wikipedia. They downloaded metadata about them, so age, date of birth, gender, plus number of different photographs they found. Then they deduplicated and created a database of 500,000 photographs. But a problem is that the photographs are very skewed towards people in their 30s. They're not super representative. So if you take a look at the UK's population, for example, you can see that the distribution here doesn't really represent the one that is available in here, meaning that the algorithm has some challenges to be properly fed with the right amount of data. And
it's a bit of a problem for us, not just in that data set, but in any data that we're using when we try to think about creating larger volumes of generative images for different forms of marketing, particularly for women. It's a little easier if you're a guy. If we ask you to age somebody through generative platforms, it kind of works for men, works really badly for women. In fact, as you go beyond 45, because there are more men than women in the older data set, it starts to, the older you get, the more it thinks you're a man. It's a real problem if this is something that we want to start to create this whole new community of images, which is kind of driving the advertising for kind of older women. So it kind of leads us more to, what if we wanted to control more synthetic images and we want to be much more specific about how we created them? What would that be like for us? And obviously, you guys will know that homophily is an enormously powerful effect. We just naturally like looking to and listening and interact with people who are somewhat like us. And this raises a kind of crunch question for us, I suppose, about to what extent do we want to follow this path down? Because we like people who look like us, even when we know they're not real. And this is research that we undertook maybe 2 or 3 years ago inside at WPP, seeing what the response rate was, both in real time and reported experiences after the interaction with different types of images. So even when we showed an image of somebody where we tried to create an artificial image that looked a bit like them, but the image itself wasn't very good. Just a couple of years ago, the images weren't perfect. Even when the images weren't great, people preferred to interact with images that represented their ethnicity, their age, their gender somewhat accurately. Really, which is kind of fair enough, you might expect that. But even when we told people that person you just interacted with in that ad isn't a real person, they're a synthetic human, people still preferred, both at the time and subsequently, that interaction. And even when we told them the person who's interested is not only real, but we base that person, our choice of that person, based on information about you that we know or that we are speculating on. People still preferred to deal with that artificial human who we'd selected based on private data, and I think that creates some quite interesting challenges for us. And that kind of academic theory we're starting to see come out in early work that we're making for clients at the moment. So we look after quite a lot of work for the government. One of the things we do is look after recruitment for the armed forces. It's quite hard to recruit people into the Royal Navy. It's quite hard because, the ads look great and super exciting, but it takes about a year for you to go through the process. And during that time, you think perhaps you don't want to spend the next 10 years on a boat. So lots of people drop out. Very hard to get women, ethnic minorities into that process. They don't see themselves in it. So we took all of the materials from their assets, from their digital assets, all of the transcripts of the call center discussions they have with people over time in the recruitment centers, and built out not fully kind of generative live chatbots, but we built a series of artificial humans to represent a variety of different ethnicities, to put more reference back to women in that, and allow people to select a managed chat experience that would stay with you over 12 months. So all the different questions that you would have over that period, you had someone to talk to see what that would do to the experience. And this is what I think is so kind of interesting is we got massively more interactions than we would have done by just having a standard single interface. We doubled the expression of interest from underrepresented groups, and we cut call center volumes to the Royal Navy by over half, because people were quite happy to engage with people who looked like them, even though they knew that they weren't actually real people. And I think it's something quite profound about what this means for business and the way that brands and services will want to push some of the ethical and policy boundaries around replication and reflection in the future, because the outcome difference is so large. And when the outcomes are so positive, it becomes a bit more blurred about, is it worth showing different age groups and ethnicities to people who are at increased health of cardiovascular disease, for example? The outcome's good. You've given you a much better outcome, but you're pushing in some places that we might not feel entirely comfortable with. It also lets us make much better ads. So I have 2 TV ads that we put together, which have been performed by generative AI, which I don't know if we've got time to watch.
Yeah, sure. We've got a few minutes left.
Just because it's kind of changing kind of what we think by advertising. I have one that includes Jennifer Lopez and one that includes Shah Rukh Khan. So I don't know who would prefer to see India's largest influencer, in fact, probably the biggest influencer in the world, Shah Rukh Khan, in an ad we did for Mondelez, or something we did for something that we didn't do, but which is great for Jennifer Lopez. So
I vote for India.
yeah, okay, I'm totally down with that. You're gonna love this.
Big businesses and brands that suffered during the pandemic found their way back, but the smaller stores still suffer.
This lockdown has been a real tough phase of my life. I mean, I have seen bad days, but this was the worst.
Last year we had small businesses through Diwali, so this year we decided to bring it back, presenting not just a Cadbury ad. This Diwali, we helped hundreds of small businesses by making India's biggest brand ambassador be their brand ambassador.
इस दिवाली आप भी ना अपने पास वाले फैशन एम्पोरियम से ही कपड़ों की शॉपिंग करें, और फिर एम्पायर फुटवेयर, नाम तो सुना होगा, अपना स्टाइलिश चश्मा बगल वाले हेवन आई ऑप्टिशियन से ही लेना, सिद्धिविनायक इलेक्ट्रॉनिक्स से लेटेस्ट स्मार्टफोन खरीद कर धमाकेदार सेल्फी पोस्ट करना।
क्या कर रहे हो? मीठा लाए कि नहीं?
लाया हो ना यार, अपने पास वाले रोशन किराना से। आप भी अपना मीठा वहीं से लेना।
We used machine learning to recreate Shah Rukh Khan's face and voice to take the local store names in the ads.
इस दिवाली आप भी ना अपने पास वाली चॉइस ऑफ फैशन से ही कपड़ों की शॉपिंग करें, पास वाले आजकल फैशन से ही, रॉयल फैशन से ही, एनके क्लॉथ्स से ही, पास वाली लक्ष्मी कलेक्शन से ही कपड़ों की शॉपिंग करें। इस दिवाली आप भी ना
Different versions of the same ad with local store names were targeted as per the PIN code of the viewer, showing them only the nearby stores. But it is impossible to cover all the stores. So we gave the power to the people to create their own version of not just a Cadbury ad. Any small business owner could promote their stores through their own social media networks like WhatsApp forwards and other social media pages.
हमारे आसपास की जो दुकानें हैं उनकी दिवाली में तो मीडिया होनी चाहिए.
Cadbury celebrations, not just a Cadbury ad.
Sorry.
This is the internet after all. How come this was not abused?
I don't actually know what guide rails we had in the back end for it. I mean, I would imagine there must have been a pretty comprehensive filtering system before stuff was put together. But you're right. I mean, a part of the challenge of this is kind of always scale. And the next one that I would have shown is a kind of similar concept, but where you effectively control Jennifer Lopez, which has, I would say, has got quite a large scope also for inappropriate usage. But it isn't just kind of facial stuff. This is quite interesting. It's from Thailand, some work we did for Garnier in Thailand, where lots of local brands, kind of mass serum skincare brands, were taking share from Garnier. We didn't have a lot of money, but we effectively recreated 43 different dialect voices inside Thailand, so that we could we could automatically serve local dialect voices based on our understanding of where the device was that we were serving to. So exactly the same ad, the same visuals, just the voice different. So just changing the voice altered the outcome by 8 times. So this sense of responding to synthetic similarity is like massively profound at quite a lot of levels. So I suppose it's the last point from us, which is, you know, we're just really thinking about the need we have to try and fill a content gap for older audiences that we want to talk to, the desire for people to see adverts, varieties, people that look and sound and behave like themselves. Feels like it's pushing us all towards this space, which we know is a kind of ethically kind of interesting area, and where, whilst there are lots of policy decisions, I think the industry and the money is moving faster perhaps than the settled point of view from a policy point of view. And that's it from Honor and me.
That was fantastic. I certainly would have a question to pose to this stuff. We have a couple questions online, and we have one very enthusiastic hand up at the back of the room. So while I'm having a little skim of the questions here online, I'd be delighted to take the one in the back there. Yes, Ralph.
Very enthusiastic. My question is about India, because that was your third case, right? And so 2 questions. One is, I mean, how much TikTok is there in India after the ban? I mean, why, you know, as I understand it, it's kind of really declined.
Yeah.
And the second is, it relates more to your kind of age misrepresentation, if you like, because I don't know much about the Indian stratification in terms of who's got the money to spend. But I mean, in India, it would be the case that the newer generations have become more well off over the last decades. So there should be less of a skew than in the UK and the US, where older people have had wealth for much longer. Is that not the case? Or?
Yeah, I think both of those things are true. So the Shah Rukh Khan stuff was not used from TikTok. That was done on Meta and on other social platforms that are local to the market. But a kind of super similar principle, and obviously, you know, there was a mainstream TV ad that sat inside it. So yeah, there isn't any TikTok really to talk of, kind of, as you know, in the market. And you're also right about the kind of spending power in that market is massively younger. So I think it's almost a different variety of the same question. I think part of the challenge we have in India is again about just often around language complexity, about rural versus cities, and trying to recognize differences in audiences geographically distributed. Work we do for Vodafone in India, for example, for Netflix in India, the default is very much to a kind of younger urban audience in the planning, the work that sits inside there. But still sometimes, you know, particularly when it comes to things like payment systems in India, mobile payment systems. We are looking for harder to reach audiences outside their urban audiences, but you're right, they have a different underlying commercial dynamic.
The question from online, we've got a couple here. The first one's just a methodological question. I mean, I don't know if this one's for you, but it's concerning how one establishes ages in imagery or videos where there's multiple people. Did the algorithm do that? Did you disentangle that or average them?
No, so we use for the simplest solution that we could find. So we just pick pictures where there is one face clearly visible. That's why we analyze, for example, 1/3 of all the pictures that are available in a Google and Bing search.
Okay, really great. Thank you. That's I mean, we all have to make compromises in these sorts of things.
True.
That's an informed answer for our students as well. I appreciate that. Do we have any other questions in the room? Or I can go on to the next one. Yes, please, Kathy.
Yeah, fantastic presentation, super interesting. Curious about, for the people who aren't typically represented on TikTok in terms of age group, what do you think draws them to TikTok in the first place if they don't see themselves? Thinking about like my stepmom, and when she sends me stuff from Instagram, that is usually stuff that just reminds her of her kids.
Yeah.
And so she sees her kids, not necessarily herself, and still loves seeing that kind of content.
Yeah.
But just curious about that point.
That did come quite a bit in the interviews, actually, just people's journey into the platform and then what they did use it for. I'd say almost everybody that we spoke to, at least, started mostly from curiosity. So they had no idea really what they were going to find there. They hadn't gone there to do book talk or to do, or for a kind of influencer trend. There wasn't a specific thing that they were looking for. They didn't know how to use search. They had no idea how to move around or to make it work. The social use that they made of it became a bit more sophisticated. So over time, they became a bit more skilled at trying to use it to find things that they were specifically interested in, which tend to be the same hobbies naturally that they have outside. They were less generally meme orientated. They were trying to steer it towards areas that they were interested in, or it was things that their kids had sent them. And then they'd go there and then they'd start and they were still there 45 minutes later, the same as everyone else. And it became a bit more like the way that we would expect younger users to use it. Over time, people become a bit more like younger users. They accept that it's going to happen to them, and they don't get frustrated when they're having to move through to find something that has more meaning for them.
Great, thank you. The next question online, the last one was from Jonathan, so thank you for that question. This one's from Kelly. I'll read it out. It says, your presentation frames this as a representation and content issue, but how do these observations intersect with what we know about the way in which older adults view the functionality of the platform? Do they see the platform as being a thing for, different kinds of people? We might say, so what's their perception of the role and the lure of influencers? Do they see this platform, like TikTok, for example, as a place for influencers that they go to see rather than maybe for people like me or for people like themselves?
I can probably talk to the second part of that question about how do they tend to view influencers. I think they bring with them experience of what we wouldn't have called influencers, what we call brand ambassadors in the past. So they have a different expectation around influencers. They're much more interested if this person has real life experience. So when you look at the people that they talk about, they want to know the backstory of the person. It's not just someone doing a cool thing. Is this person talking to me about fashion? Is a microbiology professor. What are they like in their life? Where do they live? What they want the context around the person, and they don't want them to change, because for younger audiences, it doesn't really matter whether your influencer is promoting CeraVe one day, then switching to the next skin problem. So you expect that because you've grown up knowing this person has no affinity with the brand. They're being paid to do this thing. But for older audiences, it becomes much harder when someone was promoting a product for one brand and switch someone else. So they tend to be less promiscuous in terms of the time that they spend longer time with a small number of influencers. They want to know their full backstory, and they want to spend time with them over time, not just have them come in and out.
So I want to sneak in with my question here if I can for this one, which is, and I know I said I wouldn't do a hard question, but I am me.
Yeah.
So I'm going to keep being me in that regard. And I have been preoccupied theoretically by the distinction between sincerity and authenticity. So sincerity being coming from personal intentions and authenticity being by facts and things in the outside world. What you've just described for an older audience suggests that they want to have alignment in the ML terms between what the person's saying in terms of their messages and their own intentions. Yeah. That they say, I like this product because, well, you know me and you know my products. And so, you'll get my endorsement for that reason. How does that intersect with the proliferation of synthetic stuff, which could almost inherently be seen as insincere? Are you in any way worried about blowback, or worried about, they're just hawking this product to me, and all of a sudden it's now pollutes even their trust for the platform, if not just the products?
I mean, it's really interesting that you mentioned that, because a conversation we had a year or so ago when you were talking about Goffman and sincerity versus authenticity.
Broken record.
No. It was really interesting, because part of what we wanted to uncover was a little bit around that area, and I don't know the answer, but I think you described, I think, kind of a kind of authenticity as being true to your historical record of yourself. I kind of wildly misquote. So I think what young people have no expectation about either authenticity or consistency from the influencers that they're working with. I think the older audiences have an expectation of consistency. Is this person the same as they were before? Whether that is their real life or whether they're even a real person might be less important than are they continuing my understanding of their authentic self from my previous experience with them, which is why I think we get much longer time spent per session, and we get people returning to the same influences over time and being interested in the broadening out of their story, not just the same shot in the bedroom with someone trying something different and kind of moving it around. I think they are trying to fit it into a story that is more authentic, even if it's not real.
I'll talk to you after about a neat paper that I've discovered recently on those two topics, but perhaps we might also consider them as being interested in splitting the difference in reliability. Are they reliable in some way? But that's for me. Now we have a couple other questions both here and online. We'll take one. I noticed that hand up earlier. You would still want to hold that, or can we give it to, yes, please.
Hi, fascinating presentation. I'm a visiting scholar, visiting fellow from the Reuters Institute of Journalism Studies. And when I watch all the wonderful research that you've done, I keep asking myself, how can this apply to increase kind of news consumption? When we talk, especially when in journalism, we talk about we can't reach the younger audience. In your case, it's how to reach the older audience. How can all this wonderful study and research and the tactics that you have accumulated in advertisement can be applied to news literacy and increase, let's say, news consumption of the younger generation?
I don't know the answer to that question. But I think it'd be a really interesting thing to explore how we could investigate that, because we're in an odd situation where news brands on social, as you know, are being kind of algorithmically challenged, but while people are still getting, younger audiences are still getting an increasing share of their news from the platforms, and from an advertiser perspective, we have clients who actively try and pre-allocate money to support journalism by insisting on content. It's a similar thing, but there's not enough news content for them to actually support. So we could kind of end up again in a difficult cycle where we want serious content, and we want moments when we find audiences in that more reflective new state of mind, but it's very, very hard to consistently find the supply of that audience. So I don't understand. I'm not sure I have a specific answer to how it matches to this, but it's definitely it's an adjacent problem for us, with coming from the same place, I think.
And because there's, nothing new under the sun, only except for generative AI, I guess. The next question from Pete, I'm going to rephrase it a little bit slightly, because it seems like a new version of the old chestnut now. It's 10 years old, it's not that old, the filter bubble. The idea of an algorithm favoring certain content styles that skews towards specific generations, are we moving towards platforms that are almost ghettoized or balkanized by age? Or are older creators adapting their style to fit the algorithms?
We did talk to quite a few older creators to try and understand what they felt made their content more successful, and that's part of what we spoke about earlier on. I do think there's a bigger alternative future where smaller micro communities on different platforms obviously become far more influential, because because the algorithm is obviously bringing you back to the most broadly popular content.
Regressing to that mean in some way.
Yeah, it does reduce the ability for smaller niche content areas to generate the revenue they need to power the content that they need to create for the audiences that they want to serve. So you get stuck in the vicious cycle, which is why we're always really interested in kind of smaller community groups. You know, I'm fascinated about why Reddit hasn't become the biggest ad platform kind of, you know, on earth, rather than just the biggest place that gets scraped to supply other materials. Because I think niche groups, fandoms, smaller communities, particularly for older, wealthier audiences, are likely, as soon as they can find a place where they can live. At the moment, it's just not, there's a limited number of apps, and limited apps you want to open, and that number is like 2.5 or something a day. So we need to try and work out what role they play inside larger apps over time, I think.
Yeah, it's a real challenge, because it's a two-sided, well, not just multi-sided gambit here, because you're looking at both audiences and creatives and the algorithm platform maintainers, who all will have their own different interests in either consolidating or differentiating these audiences. So I'm sure there's lots to consider within that. Now we're coming up pretty close on time, but I would like to give an opportunity for anyone else for the last sort of fact-finding information questions. And if not, then I mean, I really would just like to thank our speakers, to thank our audiences, to thank those giving the questions, but definitely to the speakers. That was really great. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.